Check, check. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and just welcome everybody here. My name is Tyler, Pastor Tyler. I'm one of the pastors here at Pleasant Valley Church, and we're so glad that you're all here. We got some of our family from this church, family from churches nearby, and we got people that are visiting, and we're just super pumped to be able to talk about this very important thing. And at this church, we really value holistic health, so mind, body, and spirit, and we are really excited to be able to have Dr. Jennifer Schwirzer. I should have asked, is that how I say your last name? Schwirzer. That was right? Yes, okay. We're so excited to be able to have her here and sharing with us over the next few days, but I get to do a little bit of housekeeping if you're not familiar with things, so I'm going to get on my notes so I don't miss anything that we need to talk about. Oh boy. The good news is I think I just deleted the note right off of my phone. Okay. So if you don't know where the bathrooms are at, out here in the lobby, if you go straight this way, there's bathrooms on the left. And right next to that, in room number 4, we also have childcare. So if you have any children or you know people that aren't coming because they aren't sure if there's children care, we do have that. So please make sure and utilize that blessing for sure. All right, and there's also a mother's room. There's a mother's room right back here. This little glass, it's one-way glass. On the outside, you can enter through a door if you need a little bit of privacy or quiet time there. And also, if you need help with anything in general, we have people like Uncle Ed right here. He's got a lanyard you can see. He's holding it up back there. It says, "Can I help you?" If you see anybody with one of those, you can ask them, and hopefully they'll be able to either help you or find somebody who can. All right. Now, a couple other things. There are a few tables outside. We've got a resource table, and on that resource table are a lot of free resources. I'm going to talk a little bit more about where we got those in a second. At the end, there's going to be a table with not free resources on it, and we want to really encourage you to check those out. I will have something to say about that. But first, if you have not registered, if you haven't registered, please register. There is a way to do that. I think Greg's going to go over it again. But one of the reasons is if you guys got one of those red tickets, can you just raise your hand or say, ooh, ooh? Okay, all right. So you got one of those red tickets. If you're registered, your name goes in the drawing for one of the several books that Dr. Schwirzer has written. And we are going to be giving them away at the end of each meeting. So if you registered and you only registered for Wednesday night, you're only in the drawing for Wednesday night. You do have to register for each night that you'll be here. So we have meetings tomorrow night, Friday night, and Saturday night. How exciting is that? All right. Now, if you have a phone that can scan QR codes, I want to encourage you to get it out for a second. And can we go to that slide? I think we've got a slide prepared. We have a QR code. And what I want you to do is you can scan this and then open it up in your web browser and just keep it on your phone at the ready. This QR code is going to take you to a Google form where you can submit anonymous questions if you'd like. And these questions will be reviewed by some of the mental health professionals that we have as part of this community and Dr. Schwirzer. And at the end of the meetings on Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night, we'll be answering some of these questions that you have. So this is a way that as you're going through the presentations, if something pops up in your mind, you can open up your phone, type in that question, and then at the end of the meeting, you can submit it. And this is a way that you can be participating in our Q&A program as we go along. But go ahead and scan that QR code, and then you can open it up in the web browser, and you've got it there as we go through the program. Feel free. If something pops into your head and you want to type it in, go ahead and type it in, submit it. If you want to stay anonymous, you can do that. We also have an option there for you to put in any prayer requests that you would like our prayer team here at PVC to be lifting up or joining you in prayer for. And we would love to be doing that with you. Okay, now, I'm going to say a prayer, but before I do, like I said, there is a resource table, and all of those resources that are available have been compiled by actually one of our mental health professionals in this church, Annalise Mans over there, if you want to wave there. She's going to be a part of the Q&A later on as well. And those pieces of paper, if you see something and you would like more information about how to help in this way, go ahead, snag whatever it is that is relevant to you. All right, I'm going to say a prayer really quick, and then we're going to get into why we are all here. All right, Father, I just want to thank you so much for the privilege of coming together and learning just about how to live with peace. And I just pray that you would speak clearly to all of us tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so we have another one of our professionals here is going to come up and introduce our speaker for tonight.
Hello. Dr. Jennifer Jill Schwirzer is a licensed professional counselor, author, public speaker, and the founder of the Abide Network, which is a group of counselors and coaches who provide faith-based mental health coaching worldwide. She's also a musician and has recorded albums in the past that have a joyful and folksy flair. My family actually grew up listening to her songs for children, and I remember on many long car rides, one of us girls would ask to play one of the songs or the stories that she'd recorded on little cassette tapes. And I just learned that actually it's over 150 original songs that she recorded, actually. So that's her previous gig. In a season of life where I needed mentorship and guidance, there's one moment with Jennifer that stands out to me. I was sharing with her just some deep, heavy things, and I expected to see the judgment I felt for myself reflected on her face. I instead saw a gentle smile and heard her voice of acceptance. That one small moment of compassion changed the trajectory of my life. While Jennifer will probably have many beautiful tools and research-based things to share with us over the next few days that will help us learn how to live life holistically, mind, body, and spirit, I hope you will all get to experience her relational heart that communicates the acceptance and love of Jesus. That is the most transformational thing that we can experience. Welcome, Dr. Jennifer Jill Schwirzer.
I am mic'd. Yeah, nothing like making me cry before I have to get up here and talk. Seriously, I'm struggling here. See, this is why makeup is sort of a fallacy for me, because it's getting washed off all the time. That was beautiful, thank you. And I remember, I think, the conversation where you were gonna like give me this big confession of what a bad person you were, and I was like, I'm waiting, and, okay, and, still waiting. It's like nothing. But she felt overwhelmed with shame, as we often do, right? Sometimes all you need is a person to be there and say, no, I don't agree. You're awesome, and I love you. And that is true of Jessica. We had a great walk the other day. It was beautiful, and I'm thankful for her. And I'm thankful for each of you. It's such a blessing that you've come here tonight. I don't know very many of you at all, and I know very few of you very well, but I am just really grateful for each and every body that's here, because it represents a whole person that I want to be part of ministering to, and so I'm really excited that I get this opportunity. What I'm going to be sharing this week is part of a longer workshop I call Anxiety and Depression Relief that I give all over the country. And so I'm going to be sharing kind of a condensed version of that for you over the next 4 days. And I want to tell you that my commitment through this workshop is to help you. If you're struggling with symptoms of anxiety and depression, maybe significant anxiety and depression, or you have loved ones who are struggling, I want you to know that I have created this with you in mind. And I also want you to know that if you will follow the steps that you are given here, you will get better. It does work. These are empirically validated, time-tested techniques and methods, but it's really more than techniques and methods. We are going to give you a list of things that you should try to implement into your life, and I'll be explaining them throughout the workshop. But it's really more than techniques. It's about connecting to other human beings that are also on the same journey. And when you have that experience of connecting to other human beings on the same journey, there is power in that. And especially when God is in the middle of it with his divine power. So the combination of your choice to be here and your choice to follow through on the things that you learn, plus the social support that you'll be getting from this lovely congregation. I've only been here for a few days, but these people are amazing. You couldn't be in a better place to get that social support. So that combination of what you learn and the social support and the power of God, there is no way you're not going to improve. I promise you that. These things are effective. If you have wondered for a while, how do I get past this anxiety and this depression and or both, you're in the right place. You're going to learn some things and your life will be transformed, I promise. All right, I'm going to give you a quick overview. Tonight we're going to talk about just basically understanding anxiety and depression. We want to define the beast before we try to fight the beast. So we're going to try to understand what it's all about. And then we're going to treat the body. We're going to talk about treatments that work to enhance brain health, because we're holistic beings that have various dimensions to our being. And one of those dimensions is physical. So we're going to talk about how to enhance physical health, and that will enhance, in turn, brain health. And when you have a healthier brain, you have a better chance at overcoming anxiety and mood issues. And then Friday night, it's going to be treating the mind. We're going to start talking about the inner workings of the psyche and how our thoughts impact our mood and our basic sense of peace and joy. And then the fourth night, we're going to talk about treating the heart. We're going to talk a lot about relationships and how connecting to other human beings is so basic to feeling good, because we're created in the image of a relational God. And the more we live in relationship, the better we are, the better we flourish. All right, so that's an overview. I want you to eventually, when you get your little folders, Miranda's in the office printing off some worksheets that I probably gave her a bit too late, but she's going to put them into folders, and she's going to be handing those out at some point in our talk tonight. And what I want you to do is follow them in order. This is the first thing that will be on top. It's called the mental health checklist. Let me just describe briefly what it is. It's basically a list of things that can impact you such that they will increase the chances that you will develop anxiety and or depression. Think of it as scales. When you have things in the scale, it's going to eventually tip. You can have one or two things and it still balances, but once you get a certain number in, it's going to tip. The idea is to take the things that you can remove from the scales. Now, some of the things are going to be things that you can't remove. You can't choose your own parents. You can't choose your home of origin. You can't reverse past trauma. It happened and it's over. So there are some things you can't take out of the scale, but there are a lot of things you can. And so the idea is to take enough things out of the scale, things over which you have agency, and go ahead and lift those things out, and then the scales will balance. So that's kind of a little assessment you can do up front, and again, you will be getting that in your folder really soon here. All right, let's talk about understanding anxiety and depression. I know this looks like an alien, and I thought it was too. Let me tell you a little about myself. I live in Orlando, Florida, and in Orlando, Florida, we have hurricanes. And so last year, we had Hurricane Ian. Hurricane Ian caused, I think it was 13 inches of rainfall. And so it raised the level of our lake, and it caused everything to be wet, and it blew off some of our roof, and then it soaked the sheetrock and the insulation such that that all swelled, and this is my latex ceiling, like swelling under the weight of all that soaked sheetrock and insulation. So I walked upstairs the morning after Ian and found that and thought that the Martians had finally come to get me. Well, eventually that broke and there was just a big fat hole in my ceiling. So that was bad enough. But then I went to actually the Northwest on tour speaking. And while I was gone, this was in November, I think Ian was in September, and then in November, Hurricane Nicole came along. Now, my lake was already high because of Ian. You guys are nodding knowingly. Somebody knows what hurricanes are like. Little did I realize that while I was out of town, there was going to be another hurricane, and that was going to raise the lake to where it overflowed. I did not know, but while I was on tour, my house flooded. 3.5 to 5 inches of rain, or water everywhere in my house. You can't see these pictures very well, but they are basically, here we are. That's my backyard, which is normally a backyard, full of water because the lake had overflowed. I remember getting in the car with my husband. He picked me up. It was like midnight. It was really late. And we're driving home, and he starts talking about how he's put planks in the house so that we can walk to the bathroom and walk to the kitchen. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And finally realized we flooded. And he didn't even tell me. It happened when I was out of town. And I said, why didn't you tell me? And he said, because there's nothing you could do about it. And actually, there was something I could do about it, and I eventually did. I called the water mitigation company, and they can move water around in Florida. So you need to know that if you ever move there. They can move it around. If it's too high over here, they can move it over here sometimes. So I called those people, and I know how to turn on the hysteria when I have to. And I said, I'm going to die of electrocution or mold poisoning. Get my lake down, please. And they were like, get out of there. And I said, I have nowhere to go. And so the next day, the water started to recede. But anyway, this is what we had. Eventually, the water was out, but there was incredible damage in the home. The mitigation people came in. They rip out a third of the sheetrock, and they plastic it over and tape it over and try to create some kind of living space for you, but all our stuff was in piles everywhere. It was like 3 months of camping. Now, here's the thing that was really hard about it. I'll show you a little more of the joy and loveliness of my home in the middle of all. That's my bedroom with a lake in it. So one of the things that was so hard about that 3 months is that my husband really kind of enjoyed it. And the more he enjoyed it, the more irritated I became. I'm serious, this really happened. I'm a woman, I like my nest, and I have to have a nice, orderly, and comfortable nest, or I get really, we have chickens now, so I kind of relate to them, because it's like, my nest is not right, you know. So I was like, for 3 months. And he was like, oh, camping, this is so much fun. And the more fun he had, the more irritated I became. And it was just kind of really tough for 3 months there. $40,000 and a lot of renovation later came right out of our pockets. The insurance never covers anything in Florida. And then FEMA can sometimes help you out, but they didn't declare my county a disaster area. Had a thing or two to say to DeSantis about that. But, so we never got any money from them, and so it was $40,000 out of our pocket. But when you have to spend money, you spend it, because my home was a wreck, and 3 months later, it was put back together. Here's my point. Negative emotions are normal. If I had gone through that 3 months, just like, oh, this is so cool. If I was like my husband, come to think of it, okay? Anyway, if I was like, oh, this is fine, our house flooded, there's mold everywhere, the sheetrock is all falling apart, this is cool, there would be something wrong with me, okay? So negative emotions show that we're actually testing reality, okay? That we're actually in touch with the world as we know it, which can sometimes be a bummer. Do you find that to be true? If you had some bummers in your life, raise your hand if you've had a bummer or two. Have you had a bummer this week? Raise your hand, okay? So bummers happen. Bad stuff happens, and as human beings, we're going to feel distressed when those things happen, unless there's something wrong with us. So negative emotions are normal. But here's something about human psychology, and that is that negative emotions take on a life of their own. If you study human attention, you will find that human attention tends toward the negative. Think about it. How many happy, positive news stories do you see out there? How many, like, someone brought someone a loaf of bread? Headlines, you don't see that kind of thing very often, because people are drawn to negative information. It grabs hold of the attention, and it sells media. So that's why media is saturated with negativity. So human beings are negatively biased. We're more influenced by criticism than we are by affirmation. That's why I teach marriage workshops. And the affirmation to criticism ratio for a healthy marriage needs to be 5 affirmations to 1 criticism, because it takes that much affirmation to counterbalance the emotional impact of 1 criticism. They've done studies on juries when juries were given negative information about someone, and even though they retracted that information and ultimately disproved it, they measure the fact that those juries are still influenced in their decision by that negative information, even though it was proven false. It gives you an idea of the power of gossip, to really hurt people. And so we are negatively biased as human beings, and those negative emotions can take on a life of their own, and pretty soon we end up completely dominated by them. And this is why, in order to manage our mood and curb our anxiety, we have to make an effort to turn ourselves away from that negative bias into more of a grateful, joyful lifestyle. Just takes an effort. Don't expect it to come naturally. It won't. Yes, there are some people that are raised in environments where that is cultivated into them from the time they're born, and there are some people that just had a little more happy juice in their genetics than the average one, but you can count, if you're your average human being, you can count on having to make an effort to feel good, and that's because you're working against a negative bias that is part of humanity. So a lot of what I'm going to be sharing with you the next 4 days has to do with unraveling that negativity and learning how to redirect into more positivity. Let's talk about the prevalence of anxiety and depression, because these are the two big hitters. For someone like me who does counseling, the people that come through my door chances are going to have anxiety, depression, or both, if they have a diagnosis at all. Very few of them are going to have psychotic disorders. Very few are going to have bipolar. Very few are going to have any of the other diagnoses. Most of them are going to be dealing with anxiety or depression. So this is just an illustration of how that works. The largest cluster is anxiety. It's the most common mental health diagnosis if you consider all of the types of anxiety, which we will be reviewing in a moment. But mood disorders are also exceedingly common. This also will give you a sense of how common these things are. All of those psychotropic medications that are represented in that pie chart are used for anxiety and or depression, except the purple sliver, and that is antipsychotic drugs. But the vast majority of psychotropic medications given to people for mental health diagnoses will help with anxiety and or depression. These are the two big hitters, and you're here learning about them. So congratulations. Let's look at anxiety straight up front. Let's get a definition of anxiety. Let's get a dictionary definition first. Anxiety is just a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome, right? What about a clinical definition? Clinical anxiety is a mental health disorder characterized by feelings of worry or fear that are strong enough to interfere with one's daily activities. A big part of diagnosing people with these different disorders has to do with, can they function? Because we all experience anxiety, we all experience sadness, but has it impeded our ability to function? That is a question we have to ask. Very important principle here. And by the way, when you see that pencil, it means it's going to be on the quiz. I like doing little quizzes with people, and the quizzes are not going to be graded. You're not going to be singled out and feel like you flunked or anything like that. I don't want to create test anxiety here, but we just do an oral quiz at the end, and so go ahead and take a picture of it or whatever you have to do to remember what's on the slide. Anxiety becomes unmanageable when it heightens to the point where it is triggered by the possibility of danger rather than its probability. Because I always say, worry has a function. Anxiety has a function. If something is probably going to happen, it wouldn't be bad for you to be a little bit anxious about it. Maybe that'll elevate your level of energy and cause you to be more focused on the problem, and maybe you'll get more done as a result of it. Had an event at our farm. We had some people staying in one of our cabins through Airbnb, and I was in the middle of a counseling session, and it was a girl and a guy, and she came to my door looking like Venus coming out of the ocean. You know that painting where she's all covered with seaweed and her hair is all long and squiggly? She looked like that, and I look at her and she goes, "He's still in there." Well, it turned out they went out in our kayak and our canoe, and they both capsized, and they weren't even drunk. It was really amazing. So anyway, the Lord gave me, because I thought the guy was at the bottom of the lake. He's still out there. I was like, where is he? He's in the lake. I thought he was at the bottom of the lake. And she brought me out there, and I see this little face, right above the surface, and I was like, phew. But I had enough anxiety, enough adrenaline in my system to where I was like, all right, everybody, we're going to make a human chain. And I went and got a garden hoe, extended it to the guy, and we created like hand-holding thing to where I could pull him out without him pulling me in. That anxiety really worked for me, and we were able to pull that guy out. It can be a good thing, but it becomes unmanageable when you start focusing it on what could go wrong rather than what is likely to go wrong. So I will do this with clients. I will say, only worry. You can worry, be anxious and worry, but only worry about the things that might happen. I had a client once. She was worried about people at church saying things about her. So she didn't go to church anymore. And then she was worried about her husband and things that were going on there. And so she created some boundaries there. And then she was worried about her children at the school. And she did some stuff there. And I was kind of new to counseling. And I was sort of walking her through these things. And ultimately, she was worried that people were bugging her house. And at that point, I realized there was paranoia going on. And so I said to her, listen, can we just confine your anxiety to the things that might happen? Because the reality is your house could get bugged. A 747 could come out of the sky and crash into the center of this sanctuary right now. That could happen. But can we not worry about that because it's highly unlikely? And can we only worry about the things that actually might happen? If we do that, then our anxiety and our worry will actually be productive. But if we don't, we will be on constant red alert and exhaust our nervous systems. Make sense? Let's talk about the nervous system. Let's talk about it from a physiologic standpoint. So you have two basic functions of your nervous system, the somatic and the autonomic. The somatic is governed by conscious thought. So everybody raise your arm, okay? Your somatic nervous function is happening right now because you are telling your arm to go up. And it is going up. It's amazing, isn't it? The autonomic nervous system, if you keep telling your arm to go up, keep doing it, do it a little faster. Don't hit anyone, but just keep doing it, do it a little faster and a little faster. What's going to happen to your breathing? Your breathing is going to get faster and maybe a little deeper. And then what's going to happen to your heart rate? Your heart rate's going to increase. Well, that's governed by your autonomic nervous system function. So think automatic. My brother ran the Ironman marathon at 50. And we have kind of ectomorphic body types in my family, so he started losing weight because of the strenuous training. And he ended up going on steroids. But my brother never does anything halfway, so he went on steroids. High doses. Did the Ironman, got through it, but then had to go off the drugs, and he got very sick as a result of those drugs. And going off of them, ultimately developed a weird condition where I would touch him. On one part of his body, it would be cold, and another part of his body would be hot. Like he couldn't regulate his body temperature anymore. So he finally got a diagnosis. It was dysautonomia. His autonomic nervous system was miscalibrated by that interference on his nervous system of those drugs. He found a doctor that had seen this before. He put him on muscle relaxers, which put him in a very deep kind of a sleep, and sleep is very restorative, and ultimately it recalibrated his nervous system. That's the power of the autonomic nervous. Aren't you thankful? How many of you are thankful for your autonomic? I mean, you don't have to be like, oh, I forgot to breathe. I'm passing out. This is weird. No, you don't even have to think about breathing because it does it for you. That is the autonomic nervous system. And by the way, I'm going to teach you a breathing technique tonight which harnesses the power of the autonomic nervous system by using the somatic. So you consciously change your breathing patterns into the breathing patterns of a person who is calm, and then that tells your autonomic system and your unconscious mind everything is okay, because you're breathing like everything is okay. So you can harness the power of that somatic autonomic connection through the respiratory system. It's the only system in the body that connects to both in that way, so we take advantage of it. Okay, so the autonomic system has two basic functions. One is the sympathetic function, and the other is the parasympathetic function. Sometimes we call the sympathetic fight or flight, and we call the parasympathetic rest and digest, because the sympathetic, and think of it as sympathy, it's emotional activation, you might say. The sympathetic system is activation or arousal of the nervous system, where you can pay attention. You're sort of activated, you're with it, you're focusing, you're, somewhat anxious. Your anxiety is useful to some degree, but the parasympathetic is the ability to turn all that off. And you need the ability to turn it off And the reality is that sometimes people lose that ability, or they can even lose the sympathetic ability, or that can get miscalibrated as well. So we typically call it fight or what? Fight or flight, and that refers to what happens to the sympathetic response when we are faced with a threat of some kind. Now, there's a third reaction, we call it freezing or tonic immobility. We find, for example, that women who are assaulted will often freeze. We run into this in abuse response work where people say, well, she didn't fight, so she must have wanted it. Well, that's not true, because sometimes the woman just freezes. Because after all, the assailant is bigger than she is, and stronger, and testosterone loaded, and a bunch of other things. So she becomes paralyzed in the face of that threat. That's called freezing. So we identify those three responses, but it's very interesting. There's a bit of research and a big dialogue in the behavioral health community about a fourth nervous system function called love, or social connectedness. And there's one theory that says that when a person is socially connected, it calms all of these other functions down. And that makes sense to me. Because when a baby is born, he is in one of two states. He is either anxious and feeling disconnected from mommy, or he feels connected to mommy and he's at rest. So that, to me, harkens back to the fact that we as human beings are made in the image of a relational God, a God who lives in constant connection and attachment and love with the other members of the original family, which sometimes we call it the original family or the Trinity. So God is a relational being. We are made in his image. We are made for relationships, and when we are in relationships, we are in God's will. We're in our design, so to speak. And so when we're in that condition, there is this deep rest that occurs that offsets anxiety. It is a fact that social engagement refers to the state of feeling bonded or connected to others, and that we humans experience calm best in relationship when we know we're not alone in the world. And it is a fact that lonely people experience more chronic anxiety. It's called limbic system arousal. The emotional part of your brain becomes sort of hyperinflated or hyperactivated, and that individual is going to have more anxiety. And that's often exacerbated by lack of connection, but it can be resolved as well by connection. And that's what church life is all about, and that's why I love church. But we'll get more into that later. All right, so let's look at some anxiety subtypes. There are a number of different types of anxiety that are part of this grand cluster of disorders. The two most common, by the way, are specific phobia and social anxiety disorder. And then these others come shortly after: post-traumatic stress disorder, which is not an anxiety disorder per se, but it is related to anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and agoraphobia. All right, let's take these one by one. Here is a specific phobia that is actually quite common. The two most common specific phobias are, and I'm going to say it, arachnophobia and ophidiophobia. Fear of spiders, and what's the other one? Fear of snakes, that's right, it's called ophidiophobia. All right, so I want to read a list to you of other anxiety disorders, or other specific phobias. Venostrophobia, fear of beautiful women. That's not happening. Okay. Genuphobia, fear of, yeah, that was going to be a scary one. But let me get my glasses here. Let me not misquote this part. Genuphobia, fear of knees. Ecclesiophobia, fear of churches. Now we know that's not happening here. Turiophobia, fear of cheese. Nomophobia, fear of being without mobile coverage. I think I have that. Yes. Popophobia, fear of the Pope. Poganophobia, it's true. Poganophobia, fear of beards. It's a true story. I'm not making this up. Chorleophobia, fear of clowns. Trypophobia, fear of holes. Ophalophobia, fear of navels. And triskaidekaphobia, fear of the number 13, which I've just triggered because that was 13 kinds of phobia. I kid you not. So the point is that this can happen, and it can happen in response to anything. But the most common are, of course, snakes and spiders, things that are actually somewhat threatening. So the distinguishing feature of specific phobia is the fear is way beyond proportional. Yes, snakes are threatening. Yes, it might be poisonous. Yes, a spider could be poisonous. But to be so afraid that you stay inside all the time because you're afraid you might have one 12 yards away is disproportionate fear. And the treatment for specific phobia, by the way, is exposure. So the therapist brings a picture of the spider first, and the client does deep breathing and whatever to calm down, and then develops a new association. He can deal with a picture of a spider. The next week, she brings a spider in a jar, and he calms down with that in his presence. And then the third week, she brings the spider in the jar and takes the lid off. This is how it's treated typically, but there are other ways of treating it. That's one of the most common treatments. Okay, let's talk about the second very common anxiety disorder, and that's social anxiety. How many of you would say you have some? I think we all have some social anxiety. And let me ask it this way. The most common form of social anxiety is public speaking, because they're not a separate entry for public speaking. How many of you have a fear of public speaking? How many of you feel sorry for me up here? Okay? Yes. So that's one of the most common forms of it. So social anxiety disorder is very common. It's especially difficult when there's any kind of unscripted social activity. People just they dread the unpredictability of it. Now, sometimes we confuse social anxiety with introversion. So introversion is a type of personality. That person likes to be alone. They get energized by being alone, and they're a bit drained by being with people. But who isn't drained by being with people? I am. Anyway, so I guess that means I'm an introvert. But an extrovert is someone who loves to be with people, gets energy from being with people. So that's the thinking on introversion versus extroversion, and it's distinct from social anxiety, or what we sometimes call shyness. I think there's some overlap, though, and this is what I think happens. Oh, you're getting your folders, good. This is what I think happens, is people who maybe are a little hesitant to be around people will become withdrawn. And the more you withdraw, the more you kind of fear the unknown, if you know what I mean. So here's what we do in our anxiety and depression workshop. We assign what we call social stretches. A social stretch is a genius intervention. You know, you'll find as I share these techniques and interventions with you that they are so simple and they are so basic, but sometimes the simplest things you do give you huge dividends. And I mean that. I've seen it. For example, I had an anxiety and depression workshop, and we did social stretches. Everybody was doing social stretches and coming back with reports of doing social stretches. All a social stretch is going a little past your comfort zone socially. So maybe you feel like just ignoring the cashier, but instead you say, hey, you know, what kind of week are you having? And have a little bit of a conversation. That is a social stretch. Or maybe you feel like totally ignoring the person that walks by you on the street, but instead you look at them, smile, and say hi. That's a social stretch. If you're pushing yourself a little past your comfort zone, you have done a social stretch. Maybe calling a friend would be another one, someone you haven't talked to in a while. What we find is that when people engage in these social stretches, it gives them a little boost of social confidence. You can cultivate extroversion. Even if you are an introvert, you can still cultivate extroversion. And I'm not suggesting that you become an extrovert, but that you have at the ready the ability to be one should you choose to be one. Should you start withdrawing too much and you need to push yourself, you have that at the ready. You have that skill that you have already honed and sharpened. And so you do that by engaging in these social stretches. If you find yourself sinking in your mood or becoming more and more anxious, and you find yourself withdrawing for people, start to engage in social stretches. Now, you should all have your folders. Thank you so, so much. I think it was Miranda that did that, and Greg, and all of you other fine people. You're amazing. So go ahead and start leafing through as I talk about these things. All right, post-traumatic stress disorder, as I mentioned, is not an anxiety disorder in and of itself, but it is related to anxiety because people experience a trauma and then they basically develop a pattern of fear of confronting that trauma again. And that leads to patterns of avoidance, which are pretty consistent across the spectrum of anxiety disorders. You will find that people with anxiety will often develop avoidance patterns. And I'm going to tell you something that you may hate me for, but I'm going to tell you anyway because I love you. The cure is always to face your fears. You have to do it systematically. Like in the case of PTSD, sometimes the person becomes so triggered, so distressed by facing a trigger that they need to do it systematically and sometimes with professional support. But still, they need to face those fears. That's how you get better. I call it courage training. When we move forward in our lives and courage is not the absence of feelings of fear. It's the willingness to do the right thing and the healthy thing in spite of feelings of fear. And you can train your mind to do that. You can train yourself. You can shape your own psyche by making those choices. So I'm just trying to empower you here, okay? All right, so that's PTSD. Now to help you along with that, we want to encourage you to develop certain grounding techniques that you do. So you have a list of grounding techniques in your folder. Look through them and choose your favorite. I like to do breathing. Sometimes, this is a weird grounding technique, but I'll put on very loud music. Sometimes I'll dance around. That helps me feel better. But everybody's going to have a different way of self-calming. So find some things that will help you self-calm, and then you will have those tools and those weapons, so to speak, to use when you need to. All right, another anxiety disorder is generalized anxiety disorder. This individual has become what I talked about a little while ago, where they become completely obsessed with the possibility of danger rather than its probability. And so generalized anxiety disorder keeps saying no to everything. I won't face this, I won't face that, because they become so afraid of everything, their circle gets smaller and smaller until they live a very, very confined life. Let's talk about how to deal with generalized anxiety. Commit to not worrying unless you have evidence that something might happen. Another thing I do with folks that are inclined to worry all the time is I have them confine the worry to a certain time of day. So you're allowed to worry, I say, because I find telling people don't worry doesn't work. Because they want to worry, they're going to worry. And to them, their worry is very functional. So what I'll say is, it's great that you worry. You're actually working through problems. You're struggling through, you're thinking through difficulties, and that's okay. But you can only do it from 6 to 7 at night. Or I have them get involved in, setting a time where they can worry to their heart's content. Because the research shows that rumination is actually functional, that it actually helps. But that random rumination, something where you just are cycling through thoughts day after hour, day after day, is not going to benefit you. So you want to structure that rumination process, and then it's going to be more helpful to you. So confine your worry to 6 to 7 at night, for example, and confine it also to things that actually might happen instead of every possibility under the sun. Panic disorder is a disorder that entails a lot of physiological responses, and they seem to come on at a moment's notice, and it's often very difficult to figure out what triggered that panic attack. How many of you know what I'm talking about when I say panic attack? This is what happens with panic disorder. The individual has a panic attack, and then basically after that they become afraid of having a panic attack. That's their main fear. And they can sometimes become so vigilant to try to know when they're going to have a panic attack that they misread cues. For example, low blood sugar can kind of make you shake. You know what I mean? And so someone with panic disorder might say, oh, I'm shaking, I'm having a panic attack, and then have a panic attack about having a panic attack when they're not having a panic attack. I'm serious, it happens. The mind is a very tricky thing. A lot of times people with panic disorder become very very committed to not putting themselves in situations that might bring on a panic attack. So that leads to agoraphobia, fear of random situations where you might be entrapped. So you're afraid of being on a bridge because you might get stuck on the bridge. You're afraid of being in a crowd because you might not be able to get out. Or you're afraid of being in an elevator because everything might break down like it does on 007 movies and stuff. And you're freaking out about that entrapment thing, and then that brings on a panic attack. So people will assiduously avoid those potentially entrapping situations, and that can lead to agoraphobia. Okay, so let's back up here. Really cool little technique that I have seen actually prevent the onset of full-blown panic disorder. Person just started having panic attacks, and I said, let's retrain your breathing. And because of the breathing, he started using that, and he was able to not go into full-blown panic disorder. So I'm going to teach it to you right now. It's very simple. You're going to make your mouth into a tiny little hole. You're going to breathe all the way out, and then you're going to breathe into the count of 6, and I'll help you with my fingers. And I'll do it right along with you. You're going to hold to the count of 2, and then you're going to breathe out to the count of 8. The reason you make the small hole is because you're creating resistance, and that resistance slows your breathing, both the intake and the exhale. It's going to slow that down to where what you're doing is slowing and deepening your breathing. Like I said, you're harnessing the power of the connection between your somatic and autonomic nervous system functions by using respiration. We call it conscious breathing. We know from, the world that there's such a thing as yoga breathing. I did a lot of yoga when I was in high school, and I have to admit the long, slow breathing was really helpful to me. All we're doing is harnessing the power of that breath. So let's do that for a moment here. You're going to breathe all the way out first until there's nothing left in your lungs. Now, I'm going to have you breathe really slow. You can keep breathing while I'm explaining this. I'm going to have you breathe really slow. And if you have to take an extra breath, don't freak out. Not getting graded or anything. Nobody's judging you. But if you can, try to extend your breathing, okay? So breathe all the way out first. Into the count of 6. Hold, 2. Breathe out. Breathe in. Hold. Breathe out. Breathe in. Now I see some of you going, no. You want to do it really slow. Hold 2. Breathe out. Breathe in. Hold 2. Breathe out. How do you feel? How many of you feel a little bit calmer? Cool. That's what it's supposed to do. You can do it in the doctor's office. You can do it in a bus. You can do it in your car. You can do it anywhere, and nobody will know, except they might be like, but that's okay. Nobody has to know what's going on. So learn that breathing. Guys, a lifestyle of courage is the determined, steady willingness to face our fears rather than avoid them. Let me just tell you, I wouldn't be here tonight if I didn't face my fears, because every time I do something like this, I ask myself, on the way to the place, what do I think I'm doing? Why do I do this? Why do I put myself through this? And I'm always happy when it's over. Go figure. But that's a lifestyle of courage, is facing your fears. Now let me clarify something. Let me clarify something. You should never face actual threats. So we work with people in detail about this in our trauma workshop. You separate threats, distinguish threats from triggers. And don't face threats, but do face triggers. Let me give you a scenario. A little bit of a trigger warning here. Say you're assaulted by a tall man with brown hair. I mean, no offense to tall men with brown hair. You're assaulted by the tall man with brown hair, and as a result, you're avoiding all men, tall men with brown hair, and even pictures of them. Those are triggers. He is a threat. You avoid him, but you don't avoid people that look like him because they're no more threatening than short men with blonde hair or no hair, right? Does this make sense? So distinguish threats from triggers, avoid threats, face triggers, because that is a lifestyle of courage. Obsessive compulsive disorder is another disorder that isn't anxiety per se, but it is related to anxiety because people develop really a fear of their own thoughts, if you want to know what it is. They become afraid of their fear of germs, or afraid of their fear that they didn't turn the iron off, or whatever it is that they're doing. And the checking and the hand washing and the compulsions they engage in actually lower their anxiety level a little bit, give them a little space of mental relief. But the problem is it's a form of avoidance, and avoidance tends to increase fear, so the fear comes back. So the person with OCD has to treat it, often with coaching and support, by actually facing the doorknob or whatever it is that they want to wash, or facing the thought that they have germs all over their hands and not washing their hands, and then having someone there to say, "How you doing?" And they go, "It's uncomfortable, but it's not killing me." And once they get through one of those passes, it's easier the second time. So you can retrain your brain. You can reshape your brain. It's really beautiful. And obsessive compulsive disorder is treatable, is the good news. All right, there's some other anxiety disorders: separation anxiety, selective mutism, both affect childhood, substance and medication-induced anxiety, and there are other medical conditions that cause it. I'm going to go into some detail about the medications and conditions that can cause depression, and many of those can also cause anxiety, but I'm going to do that toward the end. So it is essential to reason from cause to effect and remove the cause as much as possible. If I'm remembering correctly, I had a client that was having all kinds of anxiety, and I was probing around for causes, and eventually I was like, "Well, what kind of, you watch movies?" And they were like watching horror films. I was like, "Okay, let's reason from cause to effect." Maybe you're messing up your nervous system by watching slasher movies. All right, I want to tell you a story. We're going to get into depression here. I want to tell you a story. Man goes to his doctor. He says, "I'm just not feeling myself, really down. I think I might have depression or something, just not myself." Man says, the doctor says, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear this, but I know just the solution. There is a clown that performs on Park Avenue at lunchtime. Go see him. He'll make you laugh. He'll cheer you up. You'll feel like $1 million. What did the man say? "I am that clown." Yeah. I mean, that's such a sad story, but how true is it? I've had people in my office that are like famous people, or at least church famous people, and they have struggles. Like, it's amazing. Like, they put on a really good show, and yet I've had these high-profile people literally calling me unable to speak because they're crying so hard. Like, every person has a heart that can break, every single one. And so that was the case with this clown. How sad was that? In 2017, the World Health Organization declared depression the leading cause of disability in the world. It's more common than we realize. Let's get a definition. The dictionary definition is simply a state of feeling sad, but a clinical definition is a mood disorder marked especially by sadness, inactivity, difficulty in thinking and concentration, a significant increase or decrease in appetite, sleeping more or sleeping less than usual, feelings of dejection and hopelessness, and sometimes suicidal tendencies. Let's look at some of the physiology of depression. There are a number of different causation theories that relate to the physical organ of the brain. Now, I believe that causes of depression and anxiety can be multi-layered, but brain issues can factor in. So let's talk about some of those. One of the theories has to do with neurotransmitters. All of the interactions between the nerve cells in your brain involve neurotransmitters being basically thrown across what we call the synaptic gap, which is the gap between the nerve cells. And so without those neurotransmitters, nothing works. And there are different neurotransmitters that are associated with different functions. So you have norepinephrine and epinephrine that has to do with focus and energy. You have dopamine that has to do with our reward-seeking system. And you have serotonin, which is the neurotransmitter that is the most associated with mood regulation. It's kind of the mother of the brain, if I can say it that way. And so we notice in depression that the serotonin levels are impacted. The thing that's kind of strange about it is you can increase the serotonin levels by giving the person straight serotonin. It doesn't take away the depression. But antidepressant medications do increase the serotonin levels in the nervous system, the circulating serotonin levels. However, it increases them right away, and the antidepressants don't work for at least 3 or 4 weeks. And so we think it might have to do with the receptors and other mechanisms. We're not sure why those medications work. Isn't that reassuring? But they do. So neurotransmitters are one causation theory. Another is circadian rhythms. I've had so many clients that worked nights and had anxiety or depression, and I just knew in my bones that this was part of the problem. I myself notice when I travel, sometimes the jet lag gets the better of me, and I can experience exhaustion and corresponding depression. Circadian rhythms are the body's ability to sort of sync itself up with the daylight and night cycle of the earth, and your brain literally, through your hypothalamus, has a 24-hour clock in it that syncs up to Mother Nature, to Mother Earth. Isn't that cool? But if you start messing with that, it can mess with you, and it tends to be bidirectional. So if you have something keeping you up at night and putting you to sleep during the day, and your circadian rhythms are off, you're more likely to develop mood issues. But mood issues are also going to make you more likely to be up at night and sleeping during the day. So there's a bidirectional influence. Another theory has to do with neural circuits. Do a little illustration with me. Put your thumb in your palm and fold your fingers over it. This is a cool little diagram of the brain. I think God gave this to us so we could be like, what does my brain look like? Oh, like this. So this would be the brain stem that mediates the physical. Your thumb would be the limbic system that mediates the emotional. And then your fingers would be the cerebral cortex, which mediates the will and the rational thinking processes and governs the thoughts, you might say. So physical, emotional, cognitive. That's your brain. Way oversimplified, but it is your brain. So it is a good illustration. So there are different circuits that connect the different parts of the brain. The brain works best when it works holistically. Well, what we find in depression is sometimes the emotional part of the brain gets sort of hyperactivated, and the cerebral cortical part of the brain gets sort of deactivated. This is an oversimplification, but that's how it tends to be. And the person is emotional, but in a very sort of vague way. And there's a sense of dread, maybe, or a sense of fear, or a sense of remorse, these heavy feelings. And they're always feeling those heavy feelings, and they're not able to sort of talk them out of it, talk themselves out of it. And that can be because the cerebral cortical system and the limbic system are not connecting. And so there's things we can do to actually connect those two systems and make those neural circuits work better for us. And one of them, by the way, is that conscious breathing we just did a moment ago. Then there are some anatomical changes that are associated with depression. There's an organ in your brain called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is visibly smaller in people who have had long-term stress, and is also shrinkage of the hippocampus is associated with depression. So there are a lot of anatomical changes that can take place. Again, reduced volume in various parts of the brain, and then increased volume in other parts, and then brain inflammation is another factor. We like to try to reduce inflammation in the body and ultimately in the brain, because people are more optimally healthy when they have low inflammation. Now that's all physiologic stuff, but I want to talk to you now about the psychological stuff. And I love this quote from Stephen Diamond. He says, depression's roots are, from my own clinical observations, and this is a guy who's heard chemical imbalance theory over and over again. He's commenting on that. He says, from my own clinical observation, depression's roots are more commonly basically psychological than biochemical, though one clearly affects the other. Because the reality is, if you think a certain way and you function a certain way, it's eventually going to impact the shape of your brain because everything becomes sort of encoded in your brain. So there is a relationship there. But he says, often at the very heart of depression is repressed hatred, anger, rage, resentment, abandonment, betrayal, discouragement, unresolved grief, meaninglessness, nihilism, loss of faith. And then he says, without aggressively attacking this psychological, spiritual, and emotional core or heart of depression, it cannot be permanently dispatched. And I couldn't agree with him more. So let's look at some mood disorders here. What patterns do these things fall into? The most common is major depressive disorder. To qualify for that diagnosis, you have to have very low mood for at least 2 weeks, and it has to be sufficiently low to impact your ability to function. It's a disorder of extremes. You're either going to sleep too much or not enough. I tend to be someone who loses sleep when I get upset, but some people sleep more. You're going to either eat too much or not enough. Your movements are either going to be really slow, like you're in slow motion, or you're going to be really agitated all the time. So it can go either way. It's a disorder of extremes. That's major depressive disorder. And that, by the way, is the disorder that responds the best to medical intervention. The next one, persistent depressive disorder, is more long-term. That individual typically has a couple of years under their belt of just low mood. And it's not very, very low mood, but it is low mood. And it typically has more to do with the way that person thinks and the way that they function in the world. Then substance abuse depressive disorder, obviously, if you're going to be using alcohol, if you're going to be using street drugs, it's going to affect the frontal lobe of your cerebral cortex, it's going to affect your brain function, and you are going to have compromised brain function. And by the way, anything you use that disrupts the delicate balance of neurotransmitters and functionality of your brain is going to impact you. So be very careful with what you put in your body that affects your brain. Postpartum depression is renowned because of certain actors and actresses, no actors so far, but that's coming. But postpartum depression, I think, has some physiologic basis to it. I've had 2 babies. I remember the overwhelming sense of responsibility, like these human beings depend fully upon me, and I think that's part of it. But I think the biological changes, the incredible changes you go through physically can impact the brain. And then premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Why does it take 6 women with PMS to screw in a light bulb? It just does. But it can really happen badly to some people where it's a monster form of PMS, like severe, and they're at their wit's end, and it can be very difficult. It's very hard to have a reproductive system in your body. I can say this as a woman. You know, in Genesis 3, it says you're going to have pain and toil in childbearing as a result of sin and the fall. I think that has to do with more than just pushing the baby out. I think it's also all the things that have to do with having babies. There are fluctuations in hormones throughout our lives, throughout the monthly cycle, that affect us. There are so many things that factor into that. So it can be very difficult to manage. We need to encourage women and to uphold them. And then seasonal affective disorder, which I'm sure all of you have living in Portland, like every last one of you. Because I know that I would get it living here, especially like it's like all overcast from now until May. Am I right? Is this true? Is this true? And then for like 4 months, June, July, August, and a little bit of September, we're in the clear, right? Is there a little bit of sunshine on those days, right? And then the rest of the time, it's gloom and doom. So you all, I'm diagnosing you here and now, you all have seasonal affective disorder, all of you. How many of you have it? Raise your hand. Okay. See? Bipolar is another kind of cluster of disorders. I think bipolar is on a spectrum. You can have severe forms, you can have less severe forms. There are different names for them. Bipolar 1 has to do with manic episodes. A person will be very inflated with energy. They will be up at night. They will be talking fast. They will be setting goals for themselves. They will be taking on unrealistic projects. and then sometimes running up their credit card or becoming very promiscuous or engaging in partying and crazy activities. And then the brain chemistry wears off and they're depressed. And a lot of times the things they did when they were manic drive them deeper into the depression. So this can be a very serious disorder. It has to do with mood regulation. The brain just doesn't function well. I've never known someone that could manage a severe case of bipolar without medication. It's unfortunate, it does have some side effects, but it's better than the alternative. Bipolar 2 is hypomania. You don't get quite as manic, but you have the depression. Then cyclothymic is like a gentler, milder form of bipolar, and then there are other bipolar disorders. This is humanity's best attempt to describe the patterns that develop in human lives. I want to go into some of the medications that can trigger anxiety and depression. These are things that if you're on these things and you're struggling with anxiety and or depression, bring it up to your doctor and say, is there a way I can change my medication so that I don't end up getting these side effects? So beta blockers, corticosteroids, benzodiazepines, Parkinson's drugs, drugs that affect hormone levels, stimulants, anticonvulsants, proton pump inhibitors, statins for cholesterol, anticholinergic drugs. All of those can affect your mood. Isn't that amazing? Here are some medical conditions that can trigger anxiety and depression: stroke, Parkinson's, traumatic brain injury. I have a loved one who already had bipolar, then was headed down a 2-lane highway and someone came into his lane coming the other way. Head-on collision. The jaws of life had to come along, pry the car open, pull him out. He almost died. Traumatic brain injury on top of everything. He's thriving and flourishing right now by the grace of God because he had a loving family that loved him through that. But it was rough for a while there. Traumatic brain injuries can really be a bear to overcome. HIV, Lyme's disease, hepatitis, and pancreatic cancer. I just want to end with some good news for you. I have been doing this workshop online for a number of years, actually since the beginning of COVID, because I put the workshop together and then COVID happened. So I decided, I'll just do it online. This is from Bitsy. Bitsy has given me permission to share this. She was one of the first people that joined us for the very first anxiety and depression relief workshop we had online, and she accidentally got registered for it. She thought she was registering for something else. But she says, I've been able to overcome things I never dreamed I would be able to overcome. I still have a ways to go, but I can recognize the issue, and now I have the tools to be able to deal with it appropriately and effectively. It has saved my marriage and my children a lot of challenges and has made me happier and better able to cope with life. In fact, I go so far as to say it has saved my life. Isn't that amazing? And we have a lot more of those testimonies where that came from. And I just want to say to you, these problems that you're struggling with, anxiety and depression, are fixable. The reason that I'm even in this field, and the reason I'm focusing on anxiety and depression, is because I've been there and done that and got the t-shirt. When I was a young mom, 32, 33 years old, small children, living out in the country, trying to do the simple life, homeschooling and all that, which was wonderful, but a lot of isolation, and then I developed health problems. And I got a monster form of depression that I could not get out of. I could not find the help that I needed. I couldn't find counseling because there was nothing online. Online didn't exist at the time. I'm quite ancient, actually. And phone counseling was unheard of. There were no offices in the area. I couldn't find help. But as I got to the stage of life where my kids were ready to launch, I decided to go back to school. I went to school for counseling, and I learned what I'm sharing with you, some things that I'm going to be sharing with you and have shared with you. And those things started to help me. I think also when I got into the field, I was starting to make money. That felt good too. I think that lifted my mood a little bit, but gradually got out of the depression. And today, I'm cured, frankly. I'm not saying my mood doesn't go down when something bad happens, but I bounce out of it. Usually it takes me about 3 days. If I have an upsetting experience, my nervous system will regulate itself. But I used to be down for months. I'm not like that anymore because I did the things that I'm sharing with you. So I'm not sharing something with you as the expert up here, Dr. Jen, telling you what to do because all of you people don't know how to manage. I'm sharing the things that saved me from the brink. And I want you to know that. So I have a list of action steps at the end of your folder that is the very last sheet. And I want you to look at those and don't feel like you have to do them all now over the next week, because this is like over the next few months. And you can start to chip away at those action steps and they will help you. I want to read a verse to you from Jeremiah. Hang on one sec. This is from, Isaiah. He says, Isaiah 43:19, he says, I will do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth. Shall you not know it? I will even make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. Maybe you've always kind of been depressed and anxious. Doesn't matter. God can bring forth a new thing. Don't be discouraged. There are certain principles that just work, and we're going to be sharing them with you, and you are going to improve, I promise. All right, quiz. Anxiety becomes unmanageable when it heightens to the point where it is triggered by the blank of danger rather than its blank. All right, the first one is the what? Possibility of danger rather than its probability. Excellent. Somatic versus, what was that? Somatic versus autonomic. Sympathetic versus, there you go. A lifestyle of what is the determined, steady willingness to face our fears rather than avoid them. A lifestyle of courage. Excellent. And causation theories of depression include that aliens poured sad juice in the ears of humans while sleeping. Okay. We don't watch enough comedy shows. Or neurotransmitters, circadian rhythms, neural circuits, and anatomical changes. Yes. Amen. All the above. All right. Thanks to Advent Health Portland and Dark to Light for sponsoring tonight's meal. How sweet. Very good. All right. Go ahead, Pastor.
Thanks, Dr. Jen, for reading that last slide for me. How many of you enjoyed a good meal tonight? Yes? Awesome. We want to say thank you to our community partners, Adventist Health Portland and Dark to Light, which stands for Divorce Adjustment and Recovery for Kids. And those two partners mean a lot to us here at Pleasant Valley Church, and they help to pay for the wonderful meal that you've had tonight and that you're going to have tomorrow through Saturday night. So I hope that you'll make plans to come. If you came in tonight at 6:30 and you missed out on the meal, just letting you know, we know it's a weeknight. We know you're busy, and so we try to make it so you can come straight from work and that you can have a meal here so you can come well fed into the meeting and be able to learn from Dr. Jen. How many of you like the quizzes that she writes? I wish we had more teachers like that in school that had, those are good quizzes. All right, got a couple of things to do. One is that we get to give some things away. Before I do that, I just want to let you know there are two tables that are out in the foyer of the church here. One of them is against the wall, and it's got a bunch of paper handouts that are additional to the things that you have in your folder. They're resources. You may or may not want all of them, but you can look at those resources, and I think that you'll find some of those very useful. So take a look at the resource table. Everything that's on the resource table is free. There's a merch table with books, music CDs, other things that Dr. Jen has brought with her, and we're excited to be able to share those things with you. There's the people there can give you some instructions about payment, digital payments or checks for those things. And tonight we get a chance to give a couple of things away. We're going to give away one copy each of 3 of the books that Dr. Jen says are some of the most popular things that she has. And so if you got a red ticket on your way in, I just invite you to get it out right now. And I'm going to draw, very exciting, guys. We're going to draw some numbers out of here. And you got them ready to go? Oops. Get back in there. Get back in there. You didn't get a ticket? I am so sorry. I'll tell you what. We'll square that away. I'm sorry you didn't get a ticket. We're going to go ahead and do the drawing, and we'll talk to you about that in just a little bit. Okay, here we go. First one. 497-251. 497-251. All right, you are going to get a copy of 13 Weeks to Peace by Dr. Jen. And for our second one, I thought it might be fun just because we can. I thought I might give you a quiz of my own. So for the first person to raise their hand and tell me the name of the phobia of people with beards. No takers? Oh my goodness, somebody's Googling. Somebody, what? Fear of beards. No one's going to go for that. Okay, we'll draw. It's pagonophobia, you guys. Come on. All right. Get back in here, tickets. I hope no one has that tonight. I'm sorry if I scared anyone. All right, here we go. Are you ready? 497-222. 497-222. This side of the room, bringing the heat tonight. All right. That was 13 weeks to joy. Was that one joy? And last, we're going to give away 13 weeks to love. All right. Got to stir these up real good, you guys. All right, 497-261. 497-261. Oh, all right. There you go. Well, that's fun to be able to share some of those things. And there's more of those books and quite a few other things that are on the resource table. An opportunity to talk with Dr. Jen out there probably. And I just wanted to give you just two other things. If you would like to ask a question that could be shared with the group tomorrow at the beginning of the session, I believe we'll put that QR code back up on the screen if you didn't see at the beginning. We have a QR code for questions? Okay, cool. Also, that's an opportunity for a prayer request. If you want to submit a prayer request, you can do that using this same form. Just get your camera out, scan that QR code, and you can share a question for Dr. Jen and guest, because we're going to be having some of our mental health professionals that are here in our church community share in the Q&A time as well. So please do those things. Let's see, is there anything else we need to say? Pastor Tyler? We will mention, though you'll hear more about this, but there is a follow-up small group curriculum that we're going to be going through. It's something free. It's an opportunity to connect with people in a smaller, more personal home setting. And we'll be rolling out signups for that. But if you'd like to learn more about that tonight, you could look at our church website, PVC, like Pleasant Valley Church, pvclife.com, and click on events there. You'll see that sanctuary small group sign up there with some information. We'll be talking about that a lot more in the next couple of days, and we'll be handing out some sign-up forms for that. And we're just so glad that you're here. Thank you very much for being here. And I'd like to just dismiss with prayer. Were you going to pray, or do you want me to? Okay, thank you. Lord, we just thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I thank you for the hope and encouragement that Dr. Jen has brought to us. And we know that there's more to come. I pray that every person in this room will find greater peace and assurance in their life as a result of what we're learning here together and putting these things into practice. And we pray a blessing over each person here. We speak peace over them. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Thanks for being here.